Hey guys, tonight we are leaving behind every image you've ever held of the samurai. Forget the lightning-fast duels in the rain, the bloody battlefield charges, the stoic seppuku under a cherry tree. Instead, you are walking towards a quiet, low-slung building within the vast, fortified castle grounds. The air here smells of tatami mats, ink, and a faint, lingering note of wood smoke. The only sound you hear as you slide open the paper screen door is the soft, rhythmic scratch of a writing brush. You are a mid-ranking samurai bureaucrat in the Edo-period, roughly the 17th century, and your most powerful weapon today is not your katana, but your ledger book. You probably won't survive this, not because a rival swordsman cuts you down, but because the sheer, soul-crushing boredom of copying tax registers might just cause you to fade quietly out of existence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from, and what the local time is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the damp morning gravel of the castle compound, your straw sandals whispering against the stones. The sky is a pale, watery grey, promising not drama, but a long overcast day. You're not wearing battle armor. You're clad in a formal kamishimo, the stiff-shouldered ensemble made of starched hemp that itches at your neck and restricts your movement. It's a uniform designed for sitting, for bowing, for presenting an image of unshakable order. Your two swords, the katana and the shorter wakizashi, are tucked into your sash, but they feel less like instruments of death and more like cumbersome office accessories. Their weight, a constant reminder of a status you rarely get to act upon. The mainstream historical fact you live every day is that the Tokugawa shogunate enforced over 2 centuries of peace. The Pax Tokugawa, and in peace, warriors become clerks. Your battlefields are now administrative meetings. Your campaign trophies are neatly stamped permits. You enter your office, a room filled with a dozen other men just like you, all on the same endless treadmill of bureaucratic duty. You take your assigned spot on the tatami floor, kneeling before a low writing desk. The first order of business is never tactical discussion. It's inventory. A stack of rice paper and a fresh pot of sumi ink are placed before you. Your superior, a man with a permanent frown etched by decades of reading fine print, drones out the day's assignments. You are to cross-reference the quarterly rice yield reports from the northern villages. For the next several hours, your world will shrink to columns of numbers, the graceful, maddeningly complex characters representing koku of rice, the unit of measurement for both wealth and your lord's power. You've heard whispered by the older scribes involves a specific type of paper made from the bark of the gampi plant. They say it's not just prized for its smooth, non-absorbent surface, but that the traditional process of making it, involving ash and fermentation, was supposedly taught to a legendary papermaker by a tengu, a mythical long-nosed goblin, in a dream. You sometimes wonder if you need a mythical intervention just to get through the afternoon. As you dip your brush, you practice the necessary mental gymnastics to find meaning in this. Historians still argue whether this systematized bureaucracy was a brilliant tool of social control that ensured stability, or a stifling cage that smothered martial spirit and innovation, leading to eventual stagnation. You feel that argument in your aching knees. There's a quiet, subtle sarcasm in the way you meticulously record a dispute over a single bushel of millet, a case that will require 3 separate forms in triplicate. You imagine your ancestors, wilder men on horseback, who carved out domains with steel, looking down at you now, their faces a mixture of confusion and profound disappointment. You suppress a sigh, focusing on the flow of the ink, the precise pressure of the brushstroke. This is your duty. This is your honor. It's just that no epic poems are ever written about a man who perfectly balanced the annual accounts. The morning gong that reverberated through the paper-thin walls of your quarters didn't signal a call to arms, but a call to gruel. You rise from your thin futon, your back already protesting the day ahead, a day that will be spent almost entirely on your knees. The dawn ritual is a quiet, personal affair, a series of motions performed with a sleep-slowed grace. You splash cold water on your face from a wooden basin, the shock a pale imitation of the purification rites your ancestors might have performed before battle. You dress yourself in the layers of your kosodi underrobe, and then the formal kamishimo, the stiff, winged shoulders of the kataginu feeling like a cage being built around you. The swords at your side are an afterthought, their weight a familiar, almost comforting burden, like a heavy set of keys a janitor might carry. They signify you can enter certain rooms, not that you're expected to break down any doors. Breakfast is a solitary Spartan affair brought by a silent servant. A bowl of thin rice gruel, a small piece of pickled daikon radish that's more salt than vegetable, and a cup of pale green tea. This isn't a meal for enjoyment, it's fuel, and bland fuel at that. You eat quickly, the scrape of your chopsticks against the lacquered bowl, the only sound in the small tatami-matted room. The mainstream historical fact of your existence is that a samurai's stipend was paid in rice, not coin, and the quality and quantity of your breakfast gruel is a direct, unflinching reflection of your precise rank and stipend. There are no secret feasts for mid-level functionaries. You step outside into the cool, damp air. The castle town is slowly coming to life, but not with the clatter of blacksmiths forging new blades. The sounds are of shop shutters being slid open, of water carriers making their rounds, of the distant, rhythmic thud of a mochi pounder. You walk the same path you walked yesterday and the day before, your feet knowing every uneven stone in the roadway. You pass commoners who bow their heads low as you approach, a gesture of respect for the swords you wear, the symbol of a class that supposedly protects them. You often wonder what they think you actually do all day. If only they knew you were primarily a glorified accountant. A quirky, fringe tidbit you once overheard, whispered between two older retainers, suggested that the specific, slightly bitter variety of green tea you drink every morning was originally cultivated by monks in a secluded mountain temple. The story goes that a samurai, wounded and lost after a long-forgotten battle, was taken in by them and in gratitude for his life, smuggled out a single sapling, hiding it in the hollowed-out handle of his broken spear. You sip the dregs of your tea, trying to taste that sliver of adventure, but it just tastes like bitter leaves. As you approach the administrative wing, you see your colleagues converging from their own modest dwellings. There are no boisterous greetings, only silent, acknowledging nods. Everyone is steeling themselves for the same quiet siege of paperwork. Historians still argue whether the samurai's enforced adoption of Zen Buddhism and its associated tea ceremony and austere rituals was a genuine spiritual transformation or merely a politically useful tool to inculcate discipline and passive acceptance of one's lot in a rigid social hierarchy. Kneeling on the hard tatami, waiting for the senior officials to arrive, you feel the argument in your own bones. Is this quiet acceptance a form of enlightenment or just resignation? The morning light, weak and grey, filters through the paper shoji screens, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. They seem freer than you are. You take your seat at your desk, the familiar ache settling into your legs. The stack of documents from yesterday is waiting, a silent, implacable enemy. You uncork your inkstone, add a few drops of water, and begin to grind the sumi stick in a slow, circular motion. The rhythmic, grating sound is the true morning battle cry, the prelude to another day of waging war with a brush. The katana at your left hip is an heirloom, its handle worn smooth by the grip of your father and his father before him. In the quiet of the records hall, however, it feels less like a sacred family treasure and more like an awkward, overly long letter opener. You are, in fact, discouraged from ever drawing it within these walls. An unsheathed blade indoors, outside of a designated and ritually prepared area, is a profound breach of etiquette, a sign of uncontrollable barbarism. So it rests in its lacquered scabbard, the saya, its primary function for the day being a cumbersome counterweight you must constantly adjust for as you shift on your knees, and a status symbol that dictates how low the clerks from the merchant class bow when they bring in the latest tax. Receipts. The mainstream historical fact you live with is that following the decisive battle of Sekigahara in 1600 and the solidification of Tokugawa rule, a series of edicts, most famously the Bukushohato, codified samurai conduct, increasingly turning the sword from a tool of war into a symbolic embodiment of the samurai's soul and social standing. Its practical use became as rare as an honest merchant. You feel this truth every time you kneel at your low desk. The sword is no longer a living part of you, an extension of your arm in a deadly dance. It is a relic, a museum piece you are forced to wear. Its weight, which should feel familiar and comforting, is instead a constant, nagging reminder of a purpose you no longer serve. The steel, once tempered for slicing through armor and bone, now exists solely to slice through the thick, oppressive air of bureaucracy. You are a lion whose teeth have been filed down to nubs, his roar replaced by the soft, polite clearing of a throat before asking for a requisition form. There is a quiet joke you share with your deskmate, a man named Kenta with a perpetual ink smudge on his chin. You call your swords your silent supervisors, The long katana is the senior administrator, aloof and judgmental, its unblinking menuki, the decorative hilt ornaments, staring at you, perpetually unimpressed by your progress on the rice yield reports. The shorter wakizashi is the petty official, the micromanager, its presence a constant, subtle pressure on your hip, nitpicking your posture, reminding you to keep your back straight even as it aches from hours of kneeling. Sometimes, when the afternoon drags on and your mind grows foggy with numbers and characters, you find your left hand unconsciously drifting to rest on the suka, the sword's hilt. You're not feeling for a weapon. You're not preparing for a sudden draw. You're seeking a tactile connection to a different time, a different reality. Your fingers trace the intricate, diamond-patterned braiding of the silk cord, the ito, feeling the slight stickiness of the old perspiration from generations of your ancestors who actually use this thing. You close your eyes for a second and imagine the grip slick with rain and sweat, the smell of blood and mud and fear in the air, not this dry, paper-dusty, ink-scented atmosphere of the archives. You imagine a battle cry, not the droning voice of the senior clerk reading the day's announcements. A quirky, fringe tidbit you once read in a disreputable, water-stained chapbook bought from a back-alley vendor claimed that the best swordsmiths, when forging a legendary blade, would sometimes use iron sand harvested from a specific riverbed, known to be haunted by the ghosts of fallen warriors. The belief was that their unyielding, vengeful spirit would be trapped in the steel during the countless folding and hammering processes, giving the finished katana a will of its own, a hungry sentience that yearned for conflict. The book swore that blades like the legendary Kusanagi no Tsurugi throbbed with a malevolent heat before a great battle. You glance down at your own blade, a perfectly serviceable but utterly unremarkable weapon crafted by a competent but uninspired smith from a nearby town. You highly doubt any passionate, battle-hungry ghosts were involved in its creation. The only spirits you can imagine being trapped in this steel are the ghosts of particularly diligent quality control inspectors, ones who took immense satisfaction in a perfectly even polish and a scabbard that didn't squeak. Sometimes when you shift, you fancy you can hear a faint spectral tutting sound emanating from the sire, disapproving of your slouch. This symbolic weight carries a literal physical cost that is a constant drain on your modest rice stipend. The sword itself is only the beginning. The quality of your sword furniture, the handguard or tsuba, the pommel caps, the lacquer work on the scabbard, is a public declaration of your wealth, taste, and by extension, your family's standing. A samurai with a shoddy, poorly fitted tsuba or a scabbard scratched and dull with age is a laughingstock, a man whose honor is as tarnished as his fittings. No matter how sharp the actual blade hidden within might be, it's the equivalent of showing up to a high-powered corporate meeting in a stained, ill-fitting suit. So a portion of your rice stipend, a portion you can ill afford, must be meticulously set aside for the occasional maintenance, for the polisher who will restore the mirror-like finish on the blade, for the lacquer artist who will touch up the scabbard, for the cord maker who will replace the fraying ito. And if you're ever lucky enough to get a rare bonus or a particularly good rice exchange rate one season, the dream is to commission a new set of menuki, those small decorative grips under the hilt wrapping. A fine set, perhaps depicting dragons or ginkgo leaves, carved from shakudo or shibuichi alloy, can make the long hours of the sword's weight pressing against your hips slightly more comfortable, and more importantly, can make the other clerks look at you with a flicker of envy rather than pity. Historians still argue whether the samurai's near-fetishistic focus on the sword as an art object during the peaceful Edo-period was a form of cultural sublimation, a sophisticated channeling of violent, primal impulses into the serene and controlled realms of aesthetics and craftsmanship, or if it was simply the inevitable, frivolous result of a warrior class with too much time and money on its hands, and a desperate, deeply ingrained need to display status in the absence of any real military achievements to point to. As you run your thumb over the simple, unadorned bronze handguard on your katana, feeling the cool, unyielding metal, you know the scholarly debate is meaningless from where you kneel. For you, it's neither. It's just another piece of office equipment, like your inkstone or your brush. It's a required part of the uniform, a costly, high-maintenance, and deeply inconvenient accessory. You hope you never, ever have to use it for its intended purpose, not out of fear, but because if that day ever comes, it means the entire meticulously ordered, paper-shuffling, tea-sipping, protocol-obsessed world you inhabit has utterly collapsed into screaming, blood-soaked chaos. And frankly, that would be terrible for productivity. Your right hand cramps, a deep, dull ache that has settled like a stubborn knot in the muscles between your thumb and index finger. This is your dueling injury, your battle scar, earned not on some windswept plain amidst the chaos of clashing steel, but here, in the profound silence of the records hall, from the exhausting act of holding a slender bamboo brush perfectly still for 3 hours straight. The document before you is a final draft of a land survey report, a document that will be sent to the magistrate's office and potentially used to settle a bloody feud between two villages. Its legitimacy, its very power to command and to pacify, rests not just on the facts it contains, but on the perfection of your script. This is not an exaggeration. Each character, from the simplest horizontal line to the most complex multi-radical construct, must be rendered with the proper balance, stroke order, and artistic flair. A sloppy, uncertain hand is more than just an embarrassment. It's a professional failing, a public declaration of a disordered mind and a lack of discipline. It invites challenge. It suggests the judgment within might be as flawed as the handwriting conveying it. The senior clerk, Old Man Sato, who seems to be made of parchment and pure concentration, has eyes like a hawk and can spot a poorly executed hane. That delicate, flicking flourish at the end of a stroke, from clear across the room, even through the cloud of incense meant to keep the insects from the paper. In this world of bureaucracy, your calligraphy is your public face, your professional voice, more visible and scrutinized on a daily basis than your actual, tired face, the mainstream historical fact that governs your every stroke, that dictates the very posture of your hand, is the principle of Bumbu Ryodo, the dual way of the pen and the sword. For a samurai of the Edo-period, proficiency in the scholarly arts, calligraphy, poetry, classical literature was considered just as important, and in this long era of peace, arguably more important, as prowess in the martial ones. A samurai who could not compose a decent, elusive 31-syllable poem or draft a clean, authoritative and legible report was considered uncultured, boorish, and ultimately unreliable, no matter how beautifully he could perform the kata of swordsmanship in the training hall. A shaky brushstroke could do more damage to your career than a poorly executed parry. The sword was a symbol of your potential for violence. The brush was the proof of your capacity for civilized governance. One was for show. The other was for real daily use. You pause, setting the brush down on its rest. You flex your hand, trying to work the stubborn ache out of the muscle. You then re-wet the brush, dipping the fine, tapering hairs into the dark, glossy pool of ink on your Suzuri inkstone. This simple action is a moment of forced meditation, a tiny island of ritual in the sea of drudgery. You focus your entire being on the next task, the character for border, a complex arrangement of lines and boxes that must, through its very appearance on the page, convey unshakable authority and finality. This character will be the legal and philosophical foundation of the entire report. It must look immutable. You take a slow, deliberate breath, steadying your heartbeat, clearing the fog of fatigue from your mind. You position the tip of the brush, a poised needle of black potential, and then you begin. The first horizontal stroke, firm, confident, unwavering. A line that will not be crossed. The downward sweep to the right, decisive, strong. The turn, the hook, the final, sharp, clean finish. It's a good character, a damn good one. It looks like a border forged in iron, a line drawn by the gods themselves. There's a quiet, almost smug satisfaction that blooms in your chest at this small, perfect victory over the passive-aggressive resistance of ink and paper. In a day defined by abstract numbers and other people's problems, this is a tangible, beautiful thing you have created. A man with wild hair and an intense gaze who was probably just trying to impress a room of provincial bureaucrats floats back to you. He claimed that the very best calligraphers, the true masters who had dedicated their lives to the way of the brush, could achieve something transcendent. In a single, perfectly executed character, they could convey not just its literal meaning, but the entire emotional and spiritual state of the writer at the moment of its creation. He swore, with a fanatic's conviction, that a true adept could look at a scroll and know if the writer was anxious, or brimming with secret joy, or consumed by grief, or even harboring a secret rebellion, all from the subtle pressure variations, the flow of the ink, the rhythm of the strokes. The character for love, written by a man truly in love, would be fundamentally, visibly different from the same character written as a copying exercise. You look down at your own border character, now drying on the page. It is technically excellent, authoritative, and clear, but you suspect, with a wry internal smile, that to a true master, It would mostly, overwhelmingly, convey a single, simple emotion: tired. The pressure to maintain this standard, page after page, hour after hour, is immense. It's a low-grade, constant psychic hum, a misstep, a moment of lost focus, a tiny tremor in the hand. It doesn't just mean you have to scrape the character away and start over on a fresh, expensive sheet of washi paper, a cost that would be noted. It feels in your gut like a moral failure. It is a crack in your discipline, a moment of weakness revealed for all to see. It is the bureaucratic equivalent of fumbling your sword during an audience with the shogun. Historians still argue whether this extreme, almost pathological emphasis on calligraphic perfection was a genuine spiritual and artistic pursuit, central to the forging of samurai identity, a way to cultivate patience, focus, and an appreciation for beauty, or whether it was merely another cunning mechanism of social control, a way to keep a potentially restless warrior class occupied with endless, finicky, time-consuming tasks that drained them of any rebellious energy or independent thought. Was it a path to enlightenment, or just a very sophisticated form of busy work? As you carefully, gently, blow on the wet ink of your perfect border character to dry it, you contemplate this grand scholarly debate. Is this meticulous, painful practice building your character, forging a will of steel through the medium of ink? Or is it just slowly, methodically breaking your spirit, one perfectly executed stroke at a time? You flex your aching hand again, the joints popping with a soft, pathetic sound. The philosophical debate is a luxury. The report, you remember with a sinking feeling, needs 10 more identical, flawless copies before the midday bell signals a brief respite for a bowl of noodles. There's no time for existential crises between the lines. There's only the next character, and the next line, and the next page. The war against the relentless tide of paper is a war of attrition, a battle fought not with explosive violence, but with grinding, endless patience. And you are a soldier on the front lines, armed with nothing but a stick of bamboo and a pot of crushed, liquefied soot, fighting to impose order, one beautiful, tedious character at a time. The ledger open before you is not a tale of heroic campaigns. It is the true story of your lord's power, written in columns of rice. Your entire world, from the stipend that buys your bland gruel to the tiles on the castle roof, is quantified in koku, the amount of rice needed to feed one man for 1 year. Your task for the afternoon is to reconcile the projected yields from the fief's northern valleys with the actual deliveries now being recorded at the granaries. This is the most critical duty in the entire administration. A misplaced decimal point, a misread character for 5 that looks like 3, doesn't just mean an accounting error. It could mean a village is overtaxed into starvation, prompting a desperate, bloody revolt that would require other samurai to draw their own long-unused swords. Or worse, it could mean the domain's entire financial projection is a carefully constructed fantasy, leading to silent compounding debt, reduced stipends for everyone, and a slow, humiliating decay of status that starts with thinner silk for the lord's wife and ends with your own children going hungry. The mainstream historical fact you are enacting, the very bedrock of your existence, is that the entire Tokugawa economic and social system was fundamentally a rice-based economy. Daimyo domains were ranked by their total assessed koku output. Your lord is a 200,000 koku man, a fact that defines every interaction he has with the shogunate, and your own samurai stipend is paid as a fixed portion of that rice. You aren't just counting bushels, you are measuring the very lifeblood of your society, counting the individual red blood cells that keep the body politic alive. The document before you is a sprawling map of numbers, a topography of obligation and yield. You trace a line with your finger across the crackling paper, the texture a familiar landscape under your skin. The village of Shirakawa, nestled in a high valley, known for its crisp air and pure water, was projected to yield 1,200 koku this harvest, a respectable, predictable number. But the preliminary reports from the village headman, delivered by a mud-spattered runner this morning, tell a different story. A blight, he claims, a creeping grey rot, affected the lower paddies just as the grains were beginning to swell. His script is shaky, a spidery, chaotic scrawl that speaks volumes of a man more accustomed to gripping a hoe than a brush, a mix of genuine desperation and poor education. You can almost smell the fear wafting from the page, the acrid scent of a man who knows his family's winter, and perhaps his neck. Depends on the empathy of a faceless bureaucrat miles away. So begins the tedious puzzle. You pull the heavy, cloth-backed surveyor's map from a nearby rack, unfurling it with a practiced flick of your wrists. It's a beautiful thing, a work of art in itself, with painted hills in faded green and blue rivers snaking through valleys. You locate Shirakawa, a small cluster of symbols denoting houses nestled in the crook of a mountain. Your eyes drop to the lower paddies, shaded a light brown to indicate their second-tier soil quality. You then cross-reference this with the soil quality registry from 5 years ago, a ledger filled with the dry technical language of surveyors. Silty loam, good drainage but low in nitrogen. You are piecing together a crime scene, but the victim is a harvest, and the perpetrator is nature itself. Your job is to determine the veracity of the headman's claim and calculate the exact financial wound it has inflicted upon your lord's treasury. A tidbit you recall from a drunken conversation with a granary clerk named Goro involves the mice. He swore, with the absolute slurred conviction of a man who'd had far too much sake, that the older, smarter rats in the main castle granary were connoisseurs. They wouldn't just indiscriminately eat the rice. He claimed they could somehow sense, perhaps by scent, or the subtle taste of the soil still clinging to the husks, which sacks held grain from which region. They had a documented, verifiable preference, he insisted, for the sweeter, plumper koshihikari grain from the southern coastal plains, and would often strategically gnaw through sacks of inferior northern mountain rice to get to it. They're better accountants than we are, Goro had mumbled into his cup. They always find the most valuable assets. Dal, you sometimes feel exactly like those discerning, amoral rats, sifting through mountains of administrative chaff, the exaggerated loss reports, the suspiciously perfect yield claims from corrupt local officials, the genuinely tragic petitions from flooded villages, to find the few juicy, truthful kernels of meaningful information. You are nibbling at the edges of reality, trying to taste the truth. The weight of this responsibility is a different kind of burden than carrying a sword. A sword's weight is simple, direct, an honest mass of steel and wood. This is a diffuse, pressing anxiety that settles in your shoulders and the base of your skull, a low-grade headache of moral and practical calculus. You have to be part agronomist, part psychologist, part mathematician. You must calculate the exact percentage of the projected yield that can be forgiven. Too little, and you push a struggling village over the edge into destitution or rebellion. Too much, and you encourage laziness or, more likely, systematic deceit for the next season, as every other village headman learns that a sob story and a few blighted plants are a surefire way to lower their tax burden. It's a judgment call that requires the wisdom of a magistrate, the cunning of a merchant, and the cold-hearted realism of a general assessing casualties. You are not just balancing numbers. You are balancing human lives against the financial health of the state, and both sides of the scale are made of the same golden, fragile grain. Historians still argue whether this hyper-detailed, centralized, rice tax bureaucracy was an efficient, sophisticated engine that stabilized Japan for 2 remarkable centuries of internal peace, the Pax Tokugawa, or if it was a brittle, inflexible and ultimately fragile system that left society uniquely vulnerable to famine and economic shock when crop yields inevitably fluctuated, unable to adapt to market forces or regional disasters. As you dip your brush into the dark ink, the tip hovering over the margin next to the entry for Shirakawa, you feel the full, crushing weight of that academic debate. It is not an abstract question for you. It is the air you breathe, the pain in your knees, the script you decipher until your eyes cross. Your decision to recommend a 5% abatement, a reduction of 60 koku, enough to feed 60 men for a year, is one of hundreds of such tiny, seemingly insignificant judgments you will make this month. Yet, each one is a single, handmade brick in the foundation of your lord's realm. It is a decision that will mean the difference between a lean winter and a catastrophic one for 24 families in a mountain village you will never see. The work is profoundly, mind-numbingly, soul-crushingly boring. A symphony of tiny, repetitive motions and calculations. And it is absolutely, undeniably, essential. The fate of a village, or at least its comfort and stability through the cold months, rests not on the edge of a warrior's blade, but on your ability to decipher a shaky, desperate hand and perform long division in your head. The true battle for the realm is fought here, on this paper battlefield, with a brush for a sword and logic for a shield, and the casualties are measured in hunger and quiet despair. The weighty tax ledgers are finally set aside, They're colossal, rice-based calculations, a temporary mountain you have successfully climbed. But there is no plateau of rest. Immediately, they are replaced by a new, slightly softer-edged stack of documents, these detailing the intricate, whirring domestic machinery of your lord's personal household. This is a different kind of governance altogether. It is not the macro-management of a domain, with its thousands of peasants and vast tracts of land, but the micromanagement of a vast, sprawling, and intensely private estate. You are now reviewing the monthly inventory and requisition reports for the Uku, the great interior, that labyrinthine, deeply secluded part of the castle, where the lord's wife, his official concubines, their children, and their legions of female attendants live out their lives, a world almost entirely separate from your own. One sheet meticulously lists the consumption of silk thread and gold leaf for embroidery. Another details the monthly allotment of sandalwood and aloeswood incense for the ladies' private chambers and shrines. A third is a surprisingly urgent request from the kitchen master for an increased budget for salt. As this year's pickling season for plums and vegetables is fast approaching, and the stores from last year are insufficient, the mainstream historical fact you are now navigating, a truth that often gets lost in the tales of samurai valor, is that a daimyo's castle was not just a military fortress. It was a massive, self-sufficient economic and social unit, a walled city unto itself. A significant, and surprisingly vast, portion of the entire domain's administration was dedicated solely to managing the lord's private household, which could number in the hundreds, even thousands of people, all of whom needed to be fed, clothed, entertained, and maintained in a style befitting the lord's immense status. You are, in effect, an accountant, a quartermaster, and a facilities manager for a small, opulent, and deeply secretive city within a city. You pick up a specific requisition order, a small slip of high-quality paper that feels soft between your fingers. It requests 12 new wooden combs, carved from boxwood, and a sizable vial of a special first-press grade of camellia oil for hairdressing. The request is signed with an elegant, flowing hand by a high-ranking lady-in-waiting, whose name you recognize with a faint sense of trepidation. She was at the center of a previous, rather dramatic incident, involving a misplaced shipment of perfume sachets from Kyoto, an administrative snafu that resulted in 3 days of panicked memos and a junior clerk being reassigned to latrine duty. Approving this feels a universe away from the stern, austere ideals of Bushido, the way of the warrior. You can almost hear the ghost of a long-dead ancestor, a grizzled veteran of the Sengoku period, screaming in metaphysical agony from the afterlife. There is a quiet, deeply sarcastic thought that forms in your mind. Your katana, the revered soul of the samurai, the symbol of your right to take life and your unwavering loyalty, is now being used, its symbolic weight at least, to formally authorize the purchase of hair accessories. The distance between the ideal and your reality has never felt so vast or so absurd. You once heard, whispered with a mix of awe and genuine fear by a green junior clerk during his first week, now echoes in your memory. It involved the secret shadow politics of the Uku. The story went that the most powerful woman there, the Lord's chief consort, or his mother, maintained a sophisticated network of informants that was the envy of any spy master. This network didn't just consist of the other women, it included cooks, stewards, low-level guards, and, most pertinently for you, scribes and clerks within the administration itself. The tale claimed she could learn of a proposed budget cut to her household's incense or silk allowance before the official decree had even left the senior counselor's desk. More chillingly, it was said she could subtly influence everything from minor promotion lists to major construction projects through carefully placed words, a sigh of disappointment, or a look of approval in the Lord's ear during his private visits. The Uku was not a sealed box, it was a spiderweb, and its threads extended into every corner of the castle, including this very records room. You look down at the comb requisition form with a newfound wary respect. Is this merely a simple request for grooming supplies, a matter of basic upkeep, or is it part of a deeper silent power play? Is this a test of your compliance? A signal from one faction? Denying it might seem like an inconsequential act of fiscal responsibility, but it could be misinterpreted as an affront, a tiny stone of disrespect that starts an avalanche of bureaucratic misfortune for you. The combs themselves are meaningless. The request for them is a political document. This foray into the domestic accounting of the great interior reveals a completely different side of power, one that is both more subtle and in some ways more potent than the kind displayed in the audience chamber. It's not about battlefield strategy or public declarations of law. It's about the soft, relentless mechanics of influence, managing colossal egos, calibrating expectations, and navigating the endless quiet, but ferocious competition for resources, favor, and the Lord's attention within the castle's inner sanctum. A slight increase in the high-quality tea budget for one faction could be a major victory. A reduction in the high-quality silk for another could be a devastating and very public defeat. Historians still argue whether the complex, women-dominated hierarchy of the Uku was a gilded cage, a beautiful prison designed to isolate women from the real political power exercised by men, or if it was a unique and profoundly influential political sphere where women exercised significant, albeit almost entirely indirect, authority over domain affairs. They wielded power not from the audience chamber, but from the pillow, the tea room, and the private garden, as you finally, deliberately, press your personal seal into the red ink pad, and then onto the comb requisition form, leaving a clear vermilion stamp of approval. You feel in your bones that the latter argument is correct. You are not just a bureaucrat. You are a participant, however small, in this shadow government. This is where hard state policy meets soft pillow talk, where the financial health of the entire domain is casually debated over the scent of evening incense and the strategic arrangement of a flower in a vase. It is a subtle, intricate, and deadly serious game, played with whispers and gifts and social nuance. A game whose rules you will never fully learn, played on a board you can barely see. You file the approved form. The martial spirit of your ancestors, which once carved out provinces from blood and strife, has been meticulously channeled, refined, and repurposed. It has been distilled down until all that is left is the judicious, careful, and politically charged act of approving the appropriate allocation of hair oil. The midday bell has rung, a sound that signals not a respite, but a change in posture. You move from the relative privacy of your writing desk to the main audience chamber, a vast echoing space of polished wooden floors and towering dark beams. Here, you do not work, you wait. You are part of a larger group of mid-ranking samurai, all kneeling in perfectly aligned rows, a human garden of stiff-shouldered kamishimo. The air is still and heavy, with the scent of old wood and floor wax. The mainstream historical fact you are physically embodying is that the Tokugawa shogunate enforced a system of sankin-kotai, alternate attendance, which required daimyo to spend every other year in the capital, Edo, and to leave their families there as hostages when they returned to their domains. This created an immense perpetual cycle of ceremony, gift-giving, and posture-maintaining, as everyone was constantly performing their loyalty and status for someone else. Your presence here, in this chamber, is part of your domain's ongoing performance for the visiting inspector from Edo. Your knees scream. A dull, throbbing ache spreads from the joints up through your thighs. The correct seated position, Caesar, is one of absolute stillness. You cannot fidget. You cannot shift your weight. To do so would be to show weakness, a lack of discipline, a flaw in your character and, by extension, your lord's household. You focus on a grain of dust caught in a sunbeam slicing through a high window, tracking its slow, lazy drift. It is the only thing in the room that seems free to move. A man whose knees were permanently ruined by a lifetime of this. Was that the most elite courtiers in Kyoto supposedly stuffed their hakama trousers with cushions of the finest, downy feathers plucked from a specific type of migratory goose. The story went that this was the secret to their inhuman ability to remain motionless for hours during imperial ceremonies. You, of course, have no such luxury. Your cushion is thin cotton, and beneath it, the unforgiving floor. You are pretty sure the secret the courtiers actually possessed was a complete dissociation from the lower half of their bodies. Time stretches, warped by discomfort. You watch the senior counselors at the front of the room, their backs ramrod straight, seemingly carved from stone. Historians still argue whether this extreme emphasis on ritualized posture and etiquette was a profound cultivation of mental fortitude and presence, a form of moving meditation, or if it was simply a brutal, physical manifestation of the period's rigid social control, designed to break the individual will and enforce conformity through sheer, agonizing boredom and pain. As a fresh wave of fire shoots up from your left knee, you have your own strong opinion on the matter. This is not a test of spirit, it's a test of cartilage. The visiting inspector droningly reads a lengthy, florid proclamation from the shogun. The words are about peace and prosperity, but the message in your knees is one of silent, relentless submission. The true battle isn't fought with swords. It's fought in the ability to ignore the desperate pleas of your own body. The formal audience finally concludes. a slow unspooling of stiff limbs and suppressed groans that echoes through the vast, emptying hall. The sound is less a chorus and more a collection of individual creaks and cracks, like an old wooden ship settling after a storm. You rise, your knees protesting with sharp, needle-like pains, the sensation of blood rushing back into your lower legs a strange and minor agony. You walk back to your desk with the stiff, stilted gait of a man whose joints have temporarily forgotten how to bend. The majestic sweep of the audience chamber giving way once more to the cramped, paper-cluttered confines of your administrative cell. But you do not return to the lofty, almost philosophical matters of rice taxes or the intricate domestic inventories of the uku. No, the afternoon's stack of documents, waiting with a kind of bland malevolence, consists of the petty, grinding minutiae of local governance. This is where the rubber of samurai authority meets the muddy, chaotic road of peasant life. The first scroll you unroll details a complaint from a farmer in a western hamlet, so small it's barely a smudge on the map. The script is laborious, written by the village headman, summarizing a conflict of Shakespearean proportions, if Shakespeare were writing about poultry. The essence is this: Farmer Sato's neighbor, Farmer Tanaka, owns a prize rooster. The scroll describes the bird as a creature of monstrous size and ego, a feathered tyrant that has made a habit of trespassing into Sato's meticulously tended vegetable patch. There, it has allegedly decimated, a wonderfully dramatic word for the situation, a row of precious cabbages, plants upon which Sato's family's winter sustenance partially depends. The complaint is not, you note, a simple request for compensation in kind. No, Farmer Sato demands something far more profound: justice. He wants the offending bird, this feathered criminal, to be formally executed. This is your jurisdiction. The mainstream historical fact you are now grappling with is that samurai, especially those of your middling rank, served as the local magistrates and arbiters for the commoner population, resolving everything from boundary disputes to petty theft according to a complex, often contradictory web of domain-specific laws, shogunate edicts, and unwritten customary rights that varied from village to village. Your sword, the soul of the samurai, the symbol of ultimate authority and your right to mete out life and death, is now being invoked, its symbolic weight leveraged in a case of avian trespass and vegetable vandalism. You pinch the bridge of your nose, feeling the beginnings of a headache that has nothing to do with the incense from the audience chamber and everything to do with the absurdity of your station. You send a junior clerk to fetch the two farmers. Time stretches as you wait, allowing you to contemplate the sheer magnificent pettiness of it all. You imagine your ancestors, men who decided the fate of provinces with the sweep of a sword, looking down from whatever clouded warrior's paradise they inhabit, utterly bewildered by the fact that their descendants' day is now consumed by the adjudication of poultry-related grievances. When they arrive, they kneel before your low desk, their heads bowed so low their foreheads nearly touch the tatami. The air in the room changes instantly. The clean, abstract scents of ink and paper are overwhelmed by the earthy, fundamental smells they bring with them: the rich scent of damp soil, the pungent aroma of sweat earned through hard labor, and a faint barnyard hint of, well, chicken. It is the smell of the real, physical world, a world your paperwork usually only describes from a safe, sanitized distance. They present their cases with a passionate, theatrical intensity usually reserved for land disputes or accusations of theft. Farmer Sato, the complainant, is rounder, his face flushed with a righteous indignation that turns his ears a bright red. He speaks of his cabbages not as mere vegetables, but as cherished children, each one nurtured from a seedling. He unrolls his own piece of paper, a meticulously drawn, if topographically dubious, map of the devastation. "Here, honored sir," he says, his finger stabbing at a crudely drawn circle, "was the autumn emperor, a cabbage of unparalleled size and sweetness, utterly destroyed by that monster." He glares at his neighbor. Farmer Tanaka, the owner of the alleged monster, is a wiry man with a permanently skeptical squint and a defiant glint in his eye. He doesn't deny the trespass, but instead mounts a character defense for his bird. "My rooster Taro is a champion, a bird of impeccable lineage. He was merely inspecting the vegetation. Those cabbages were clearly of inferior quality, wilted and weak. He was doing this man a favor by culling the unfit." He puffs out his chest slightly, as if he himself is the proud rooster. You listen, your face a mask of impartial severity, your hands folded neatly on the desk. Inside, however, you are battling a wave of surreal, bone-deep absurdity. You are a trained warrior and bureaucrat, versed in law, poetry, and administration. And you are listening to two grown men argue with more strategic nuance than some generals, all over a rooster and a row of cabbages. You recall from your dusty legal training manual surfaces in your mind a welcome escape from the feathered drama before you. It mentioned that in some remote coastal domains, disputes over fishing net damage or stolen catches were sometimes settled not by magistrates, but by a form of divine ordeal. The accused would be made to hold a live, notoriously slippery conger eel. If they could maintain their grip for the duration of a specific, rather lengthy chant recited by a local priest, they were deemed innocent, the eel's squirming struggle serving as a proxy for the god's judgment. You briefly, desperately wish you could apply that principle here. Let the rooster Taro decide his own fate. Let him be placed in a pen with two piles of feed, one representing guilt, the other innocence, and see which he pecks at. It would be no less arbitrary than your own judgment, and arguably more entertaining. After an hour of deliberation, which is mostly you waiting for them to exhaust their reservoirs of indignation and inventive insults, you render your judgment. You speak in a calm, measured tone, your voice cutting through their simmering resentment. The rooster Taro is spared execution. Such a capital punishment, you declare, is disproportionate to the crime of vegetable destruction, however grievous. However, Farmer Tanaka is found responsible for his animal's actions. He must provide Farmer Sato with 3 new, healthy cabbage seedlings of a comparable variety to replant. Furthermore, he is ordered to construct a taller, more secure coop from which his champion cannot escape to conduct his inspections. It is a Solomon-like decision, an attempt to split the difference, and you can see instantly that it feels profoundly unsatisfying to everyone involved. Sato didn't get his vengeful execution. Tanaka has been inconvenienced and financially slighted. An old senior clerk once told you that this universal dissatisfaction was the true mark of a fair compromise in peasant disputes. If both parties leave unhappy, you've probably found the messy middle ground of justice. Historians still argue whether this system of samurai-led local justice was an efficient, accessible form of dispute resolution that maintained village-level order and integrated the warrior class into the fabric of society, or if it was an arbitrary, often ignorant imposition of warrior class values and sensibilities on a peasant population with its own deeply ingrained, ancient customs and methods of conflict resolution that were far more nuanced and effective. As the two farmers bow and shuffle out, already resuming their muttered argument in the corridor, you feel the truth lies somewhere in the frustrating, ambiguous middle. You have imposed order, a top-down, paper-based order. You have created a record, but the order is brittle, paper-thin. You know that back in their village, the real resolution, or the resumption of their feud, will play out according to older, more local rules of shame, community pressure, and perhaps a clandestine brick thrown through a window one dark night. The real victory, for you and for the system you represent, is not that you created lasting peace between Sato and Tanaka. The victory is that the case is now closed, documented, stamped with your seal, and filed away in a wooden box, another tiny, smouldering fire in the endless human forest of conflict extinguished. For now, with a brushstroke instead of a blade, the paperwork at least is peaceful, and the rooster, Taro, lives to crow another day, blissfully unaware of the bureaucratic storm he has caused. The final administrative scroll is rolled shut, its official seal still warm from the heat of your hand. The rigid posture of the bureaucrat can, for a moment, be set aside. As the evening light softens, casting long, gentle shadows across the tatami, you reach for a different kind of paper, a sheet of pristine, gossamer-thin washi, and a finer brush. This is the time for poetry, the nightly gathering where the clatter of the abacus is replaced by the soft rhythm of seasonal verse. The mainstream historical fact you are participating in is the deep integration of literary arts, particularly the composition of waka and later haiku, into samurai culture. A warrior was expected to be able to appreciate the poignancy of the cherry blossom and articulate it in 31 syllables, to find the universe in the leap of a frog. This wasn't a hobby, it was a vital aspect of your cultivated identity, your bun, your cultural refinement. You join a small circle of colleagues in a spare room overlooking a miniature garden. The air is different here, lighter, scented with the faint, clean aroma of the paper and the subtle, woody perfume of a single stick of incense burning in a corner. Kenta, the man with the ink-smudged chin, is there, his face transformed from a clerk's weary mask to one of keen anticipation. The topic for the evening is The lingering chill, a fitting theme for the damp evening that has settled after the sun's retreat. You all gaze out at the garden, at the mossy stones and the carefully pruned pine, seeking inspiration. You once read in an annotated poetry collection suggested that the greatest masters of linked verse, Renga, could sense the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere when a truly perfect verse was composed. It was said the flame of the candle would flicker in a specific way, or a single petal would fall from an arrangement at the exact moment the final syllable was spoken. You glance at the candle flame, steady and unimpressed, awaiting your offering. Your mind, still cluttered with the day's numbers and the image of that belligerent rooster, struggles to find the required elegance. You think not of grand, romantic chills, but of the specific bone-deep cold of the record hall in the early morning, the kind that seeps through the tatami and into your knees. You think of the steam of your morning tea vanishing into the air. It feels too mundane, too personal. But then you remember the principle of wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection and transience. Perhaps the true chill is not in the storm, but in the quiet, lingering dampness after the rain has passed. Historians still argue whether the samurai's embrace of poetry and tea ceremony represented a genuine, profound internalization of aristocratic and monastic cultural values or was largely a performance, a way to signal one's sophistication and network with powerful patrons in a politically stable but highly competitive society. As you finally put brush to paper, composing a simple verse about the moon's pale reflection on the damp stones of the garden path, you feel it's a bit of both. The act is performative, yes, but in the quiet concentration of crafting the syllables, there is a genuine moment of peace, a brief escape from the ledgers. For a few moments, you are not a bureaucrat, but a poet, and the weight of your sword is replaced by the weight of a single, perfectly chosen word. The poetry session ends not with a closing ceremony, but with a silent, shared understanding. The transition is seamless. You move from the airy room of verse to another smaller chamber, this one dominated by the stark, profound simplicity of the tea room. Here, the world shrinks to a space of 4.5 tatami mats. You are a guest at a tea ceremony, and the host is not a fellow clerk, but a senior administrator, a man whose favor could smooth the path for a promotion or a slightly more desirable assignment. The mainstream historical fact you are navigating is that the tea ceremony, chanoyu, evolved during the Sengoku period and into the Edo era into a crucial political and social ritual for the samurai class. It was a neutral, highly codified space where alliances were hinted at, rivalries were subtly displayed, and social hierarchies were both enforced and occasionally quietly challenged. Every movement, from the way you enter through the low, cramped door, the nijiriguchi, designed to force humility, to the way you admire the chosen tea bowl, is a word in a silent conversation. You kneel, your already protesting joints sending fresh waves of complaint. The host, Senior Counselor Ishida, performs the ritual preparation of the matcha. His movements are fluid, economical, and utterly precise. The whisking of the vibrant green powder into a froth is the only sound, a soft, rhythmic swishing that fills the silent room. You accept the bowl, turning it carefully in your hands to avoid drinking from its front, the most aesthetically prized part. The tea is bitter, thick, and intensely vegetal. It is not meant to be pleasant. It is meant to be experienced. You've heard, whispered with a kind of reverent fear, concerns the tea masters who served the great unifiers like Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi. It was said that the choice of a simple, rustic, or even cracked tea bowl could be a deliberate, deadly insult, a signal of disgrace that could precede a forced suicide or military attack. The story goes that a daimyo, upon being presented with a visibly repaired bowl using gold lacquer, the art of kintsugi, knew he was being told his loyalty was both broken and precious, a mixed message that kept him awake for weeks. You glance at your own bowl, a simple dark shinoware piece. You desperately hope it carries no hidden meaning. This is where the modern aside fits. It's like a high-stakes business lunch, but where no one is allowed to talk about business, and the quality of the food is irrelevant. All that matters is the subtext. Historians still argue whether the extreme, almost obsessive codification of the tea ceremony by masters like Sen no Rikyu was a genuine spiritual path focusing on humility, mindfulness, and the appreciation of the imperfect, or if it was ultimately just another sophisticated tool for political maneuvering and social one-upmanship in a courtly society with too much time on its hands. As you take your second prescribed sip, you feel the pressure. Is Counselor Ishida's serene smile a sign of approval or a mask for disappointment? The ceremony continues in absolute silence, a ballet of prescribed motions, and you are a dancer who must not miss a single step. Your career may not be won in this room, but it could very well be broken here over a bowl of bitter whipped grass. The bitter, vegetal taste of the tea lingers on your tongue, a fittingly astringent prelude to the task that awaits you back at your quarters. The ceremonial bowing is over, the silent, intricate politics of the tea room concluded. Now, in the private, unadorned silence of your own small room, you face a different, more intimate and far more desperate kind of battle. Your household accounts. Unrolling your personal ledger is a humbling, almost degrading experience. The scroll seems to sigh as it opens, revealing the stark truth of your life in columns of black and, all too often, damning red ink. Your stipend, paid in rice, is a generous abstraction on paper, a number that sounds impressive when spoken aloud. But here, in this ledger, it is converted into the actual, unforgiving coin needed to navigate the world, and the abstraction crumbles into financial reality. The mainstream historical fact that dictates your nightly calculations, the inescapable economic trap of your existence, is that while the samurai sat firmly at the top of the official social hierarchy, their fixed stipends, often saddled with hereditary debt and the immense, unrelenting pressure of maintaining their status, left a vast number of them in a state of perpetual, genteel poverty. You are, legally and socially, wealthier than any merchant, but your obligations are a bottomless pit, and your income is a shallow, fixed well. With a sigh that carries the weight of the entire Tokugawa bureaucracy, you begin to list your expenses, each entry a small stone added to the cairn of your anxiety. First, and most non-negotiable, is the cost of having your kamishimo restarched, repaired, and its frayed threads reinforced. This is not vanity, it is survival. A samurai in a shabby uniform is a contradiction in terms, a walking insult to his lord and his class. It is the equivalent of a modern CEO showing up to a board meeting in a stained, threadbare suit. The crisp, winged shoulders of the kataginu are your corporate armor, and without it, you are nothing. Next, the subscription fee for the monthly poetry circle. This too is not a frivolity. It is a necessary investment in your social and professional network, the glue that binds you to your peers and, more importantly, to your superiors. To miss a gathering is to fade from collective memory, to be passed over for a slightly better assignment, to be forgotten. Then comes the true budget killer, the upcoming gift for Counselor Ishida's son's wedding. The amount is a diplomatic minefield. It must be significant enough to show genuine respect and secure his goodwill, but not so lavish as to appear desperate, sycophantic, or, worse still, a silent criticism of his own perceived wealth. You've spent sleepless nights calculating this figure, a number that holds more tension than any battlefield strategy. And then, of course, there are your swords. You glance at them, resting on their stand in the corner of the room. The katana's scabbard, the saya, has a hairline crack near the opening, and the lacquer is beginning to cloud in one spot. It needs re-lacquering, a specialized, painstaking process that will cost a small fortune. The ito, the braided silk on the hilt, is slick and dark with the oils from your father's hands and your own, and is starting to fray. It too will need replacement soon. These are not just weapons. They are the physical manifestation of your soul, as the saying goes. And your soul, it turns out, is exorbitantly expensive to maintain. A tidbit you once picked up from a disgruntled, older samurai soaking in the public bathhouse surfaces in your mind. A dark and cynical whisper from the financial abyss. He claimed, with the grim conviction of a man who had been there, that some of the most cash-strapped low-ranking warriors engaged in a secret, deeply shameful practice. They would commission master craftsmen to create exquisite, perfect replicas of their sword furniture, the tsuba, handguard, the fuchi and kashira, pommel caps, and even the blades themselves, out of cleverly painted and weighted wood. These convincing fakes would be worn on daily duties, around the castle and town, while the real valuable steel was quietly pawned to discreet, often amused, merchant moneylenders for ready cash. The entire practice was a desperate gamble, a race to redeem the real blades before a surprise arms inspection or, the gods forbid, a real emergency that required actual sharp metal. You look at your own katana, its simple bronze handguard gleaming dully in the lamplight. The idea is both horrifying, a profound violation of the warrior's code, And yet, in this moment of cold, calculating financial panic, strangely, insidiously tempting, what would it matter, a small voice whispers, if for just a few months the soul of this samurai were made of pine? This is the economics of honor. Your social standing, your very identity, is a performance, a meticulously staged play, and the production costs are astronomical. A shabby appearance, an inferior gift, an inability to participate in the cultural gatherings that are the currency of influence. These are social deaths, and they can be as final and career-ending as a physical one. There is no room for financial vulnerability. It is seen as a moral failing, a lack of discipline, a flaw in your essence. Historians still argue whether this systemic financial pressure on the samurai class was a deliberate, brilliant policy by the Tokugawa shogunate to keep them dependent, indebted and perpetually scrambling, thus preventing them from amassing the independent wealth needed to fund rebellions, or if it was simply an unintended consequence of a rigid, rice-based stipend system operating within a rapidly commercializing, cash-based economy that left the warrior class behind. As you stare at the red ink, the numbers blurring together into a damning pink haze, you feel the scholarly debate is utterly academic. The result, the lived experience, is the same. The noble warrior, the fearless retainer, the stern magistrate, is kept in line not by fear of his lord's displeasure or an enemy's arrow, but by the cold fear of the landlord, the tailor, the sword polisher, and the rice broker. You are a prisoner of your own status. You close the ledger with a definitive thud. The numbers don't add up. They never do. The abacus in your mind is left with a series of unsettling remainders, debts that carry over from month to month, year to year, a financial fog that never lifts. Tomorrow, you will have to swallow your pride, wrap your real steel swords in a cloth, and visit the rice broker in the merchant's quarter. You will sit on the floor of his opulent, slightly garish home, a place that would be considered vulgar for a samurai, but speaks of his very real, very liquid wealth, and you will listen to his politely veiled condescension as he offers you a less than favorable exchange rate for your portion of stipend rice. He will speak of market fluctuations and transportation costs, all the while knowing you have no other choice. You will accept his terms because you must. Honor, you are learning, is a habit more expensive than any vice, a relentless tax on your very being, and you are forever behind on the payments. The formal ledger is put away, its scroll tightly bound, a silken cocoon containing the dry, brittle facts of the domain's existence. The official mask of the samurai, the stern, unflappable bureaucrat, the paragon of duty and restraint, is set aside as carefully as you place your public swords on their stand. They are props for the daylight hours, now, in the dim, honeyed light of a single paper lantern in your quarters. A different world breathes, stretches, and comes alive. This is the realm of clandestine pleasures, a soft focus space where the rigid, razor-sharp hierarchy of the day softens, blurs, and dissolves into the whispered intimacies of the night. The air, once thick with the smell of ink and authority, now holds the faint, sweet scent of cheap beeswax and the promise of transgression. A fellow clerk, Kenta, has joined you, his familiar presence a comfort. The man with the perpetual ink smudge on his chin is now just a man, his face relaxed, the lines of stress smoothed away by the shadows. A small, unmarked flask of potent, smuggled sake appears from within the folds of his casual yukata. It's not the refined sipping sack of a formal toast. This is rough, fiery stuff, distilled in some hidden back-alley shack, meant for effect, not ceremony. It passes between you, a vessel of liquid conspiracy, its warmth a welcome burn in your throat and belly. The conversation, once dominated by tax yields and procedural minutiae, has shed its official skin. Now it is about gossip, the mainstream historical fact you are now actively indulging in. The social reality beneath the polished surface of Tokugawa law is that despite the strict public moral codes and sumptuary laws designed to keep everyone in their place, a vibrant, thriving, and often gloriously illegal underworld of entertainment flourished like a fungus in the castle's damp foundations. The pleasure quarters, with their licensed and unlicensed delights. The illicit theatres where kabuki actors, officially despised, were secretly adored. The unlicensed sake houses that operated in a wink and nod understanding with the authorities. All of them catered to a mixed clientele of samurai, merchants and townspeople, all shedding their daytime identities and seeking a few hours of release from the suffocating confines of their social roles. Kenta leans in, the lantern light carving deep hollows in his face, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial murmur that seems to absorb the very sound from the room. He speaks of Senior Counselor Ishida, your tea ceremony host, the man whose every movement is a study in controlled perfection. The rumor, Kenta whispers, his breath smelling of spirits and secrets, is that the stern counselor has a particular fondness for a certain onnagata, a kabuki actor renowned for his female roles. Not just an appreciation for his art, mind you, but a specific personal fondness. He's been seen, they say, leaving a certain tea house near the theatre district late at night, his face softer, his posture less rigid. This is dangerous talk, the kind of whispered speculation that could, if it reached the wrong ears, see a man's reputation, if not his stipend, stripped away. A samurai honor was a brittle thing, and a scandal involving the floating world could shatter it utterly. Yet it is irresistible. In these whispered revelations, the powerful are rendered human, fragile, and subject to the same foolish, messy, and undeniable passions as everyone else. It's a rebalancing of the scales, a tiny act of psychological warfare against the system that grinds you down daily. If the unflappable Ishida has his secret weaknesses, then perhaps your own struggles and desires are not a sign of failure, but of a shared, hidden humanity. Emboldened by the sake and the camaraderie, you share a story of your own, something you heard from a servant whose cousin was a scene shifter at a small puppet theatre. It concerns a famously strict martial arts instructor, a man who could break a man's arm with a flick of his wrist and whose glare could freeze water. This paragon of martial vigor, you reveal, is secretly a devoted, weepy fan of Bunraku puppet theatre, particularly the tragic love stories. He allegedly disguises himself in a